The gold-embossed invitation felt heavier than a gravestone in my hands. The cardstock was thick and creamy, the kind of paper that costs more per sheet than I used to make in an hour of scrubbing other people's floors. It was for my son, David's 25th wedding anniversary. A silver jubilee. A lavish affair to be held at the Oak Terrace Country Club, a place with rolling green lawns and a strict dress code, a place I had only ever seen from the outside, through its imposing wrought iron gates. The invitation was beautiful, a testament to a life of success, a life I had worked my hands raw to give him. But my name wasn't on it. Not correctly, anyway. The elegant calligraphy was addressed to a Mrs. Rose Peterson, but the address listed below my name was for a small, second-floor apartment on the other side of town, a place I had moved from 2 years ago after the landlord raised the rent. 2 years. For 24 months, my own son, the center of my universe, the boy whose every scraped knee I had kissed and every fevered brow I had cooled, had not known where his own mother lived. He had been sending his obligatory Christmas cards and the occasional generic birthday greeting to an empty apartment. They hadn't just forgotten to update their address book. The truth, cold and sharp as the winter wind rattling my window pane, settled into my soul. They hadn't forgotten my address. They had forgotten me. Hi everyone, I'm Grandma Rose. I'm 78 years old. And I'm sitting here in my small, clean apartment with a ghost. The ghost of the life I sacrificed for a family that no longer seems to have a place for me on their guest list. I look down at my hands, at the knuckles swollen and gnarled by a lifetime of work. These hands are a roadmap of my love. Each swollen joint is a late-night shift at the diner, so David could have new shoes for school. Each patch of dry, rough skin is a floor scrubbed on my hands and knees in a rich woman's house, so he could go on a class trip. Each faint, silvery scar on my fingertips is from a sewing needle, working late into the night, my back aching, to tailor clothes so he would look as good as the other boys. This is the secret I'm about to share with you. Not a secret of money or hidden affairs. It is the secret of the true cost of a mother's love. My son and his beautiful wife, Karen, live in a world of catered parties and designer clothes. They know I worked hard. They say it sometimes, with a vague, dismissive wave of the hand. Oh, Mom was amazing. She worked so hard for me. But they have no concept of the reality of that work. They have no idea about the burning shame of cleaning another woman's toilet, the gnawing ache in a back that never gets to rest, the taste of cheap coffee and day-old bread that was my dinner, for years, so that he could have fresh milk and meat. They see my past as a quaint, distant story, a chapter in a book that is now closed. They don't understand that the story is written on my body, in my bones, and it is a story I live with every single day. Tonight, holding this invitation to a party I was never meant to receive, I realize it's time that they remembered the prologue to their comfortable lives. So please, pour yourself a cup of tea. This is not an easy story to tell. It's a story about sacrifice and the quiet, creeping pain of being forgotten. Your presence here, a simple like or a subscription to Grandmother's Diary, gives me the courage to look back at the woman I was, and the mother I tried to be. My story doesn't begin in a sun-drenched, happy memory. It begins in the harsh, fluorescent glare of a hospital hallway, with the smell of antiseptic and the terrible final silence of a doctor telling me that my husband, my strong, laughing Tom, was gone. A sudden brain aneurysm. He was 32 years old. I was 30, and our son, David, was just 5. One moment, my life was a partnership, a shared dream. The next, I was a widow, a single mother with a 5-year-old boy, a mountain of unexpected debt, and a future that had suddenly become a terrifying blank wall. Tom was a good man, a mechanic with a heart of gold and hands that were always covered in grease. We didn't have much, but we had a fierce, joyful love. We had plans. We were going to save up, buy a small house with a yard, and maybe have another baby. His death didn't just take him from me. It took all those plans, all those futures, and burned them to ash. All we had left was a small life insurance policy that barely covered the funeral and a few months' rent on our tiny apartment. In those first few months of grief, I was adrift. But every morning, a small hand would pat my cheek, and a small voice would say, "It's okay, Mommy?" David, my son, he became my reason, my anchor, and I made a vow to him, a silent, ferocious promise, in the dead of night while he slept. I swore that he would never feel the sting of poverty that I felt. He would never know the cold fear of an empty cupboard. I would be his shield. I would work my hands to the bone. I would swallow my pride. I would do whatever it took to give him the future his father would have wanted for him. I had no idea then that I was signing a contract with fate, one that would be paid for with my own body, piece by piece, over the next 30 years. My life split into 3. By day, from 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, while David was at school, I was a ghost. I became a cleaning lady for the wealthy families in the affluent suburbs on the other side of town. I would take 2 buses to get there, entering their grand houses through the back door. I learned the geography of other people's lives from my hands and knees. I knew the type of marble that stained easily, the smell of different wood polishes, the way dust collected on the rungs of expensive unsat-in chairs. The humiliation was a constant, low-grade fever. I was invisible. The women of the houses would talk on the phone right in front of me, discussing their dinner parties and their trips to Europe, as if I were a piece of furniture. Sometimes their children would stare at me, this strange, quiet woman scrubbing their floors, and I would have to fight back tears, thinking of my own little boy in his crowded public school classroom. I would come home smelling of bleach and ammonia, my back a solid block of fire, my hands raw and red. I would soak them in cold water, just so I could be gentle when I helped David with his homework. After I picked David up from school and made him dinner, my second life began. From 7 in the evening until well past midnight, I was a seamstress. I had always been good with a needle, a skill my own mother had taught me. I put up flyers at local dry cleaners and dress shops. Soon, a steady stream of work came in. Hems to be taken up, suits to be tailored, bridesmaid dresses to be altered. Our tiny living room became my workshop. The hum of my sewing machine was the soundtrack to David's childhood evenings. While he slept, I worked under the light of a single dim lamp, my eyes straining, my shoulders aching, my fingers becoming a pincushion of tiny bloody dots from stray needles. Some nights, I would be so tired I would fall asleep at the machine, waking up with a stiff neck and the pattern of a half-finished sleeve imprinted on my cheek. But every dollar I earned was a dollar for David's future. It was money for his books, for his school trips, for the braces he needed, for the savings account I so painstakingly fed, nickel by dime, for his college fund. My third life was on the weekends. From Friday night until Sunday evening, I was a waitress at a 24-hour diner near the highway. It was a world of sticky tables, tired truckers, and the constant smell of stale coffee and hot grease. My feet would swell so much by the end of a 12-hour shift that I could barely squeeze them into my shoes to walk home. I dealt with rude customers, with handsy cooks, with the bone-deep exhaustion of being on my feet for an entire weekend. But the tips were good. Cash money. Money that went directly into an old coffee can I kept hidden in my closet. The can I had labeled David's University. This was my life. A grueling, relentless cycle of work and exhaustion, fueled by a mother's desperate love. And in the middle of it all was my son. He was a good boy. He knew we were poor, but he never complained. He did his homework without being asked. He won awards at the school science fair. He would sometimes come and sit with me while I sewed, his small face full of concern. "Does your back hurt, Mom?" he'd ask. "It's okay, sweetheart," I'd lie, smiling. "One day I'll make all this worth it," he promised me once, his eyes fierce with a child's conviction. "I'll get a good job and I'll buy you a big, beautiful house, and you'll never have to work again." That promise was the fuel that kept me going through the longest, darkest nights. His success became the singular focus of my existence. He was a brilliant student, and with the money I had bled for, he went to the state university to study business. He was the first person in our family to get a degree. The day he graduated, I sat in the audience, my hands clasped together, tears streaming down my face. My hands were swollen and chapped. My back was aching, but my heart was soaring. I had done it. I had given him his future. He got a good job in finance right out of college. And then he met Karen. She was from a world I only knew from scrubbing its floors. A world of old money, country clubs, and effortless elegance. She was beautiful, polished, and she adored David. I wanted to be happy for him. I truly did. But the first time he brought her to my small, cramped apartment, I saw the flicker of something in her eyes as she took in my worn-out furniture and my simple, handmade curtains. It wasn't disdain, not exactly. It was a polite, well-bred confusion, as if she were a tourist observing a strange, primitive culture. The distance began then. It wasn't a sudden break, but a slow continental drift. My world of bleach and sewing machines didn't fit into their new world of dinner parties and weekend trips to the Hamptons. The phone calls, once daily, became weekly, then monthly. The visits became obligatory holiday affairs, brief and strained. I would see my son, dressed in his expensive, tailored suits, and he would look at me with a kind of loving pity, a quiet embarrassment. I was the story of his humble beginnings, a story he was increasingly eager to leave in the past. He and Karen were building a new life, a beautiful, gleaming structure that had no room for the grimy, calloused hands that had laid its foundation. The invitation lay on my small kitchen table, a square of creamy white in a pool of late afternoon sun. It looked so clean, so pristine, so utterly alien in my world. For a long time, I just sat there, my teacup cold in my hands, my gaze fixed on the elegant, swirling calligraphy of my own name. Mrs. Rose Peterson. It was me, and yet it wasn't. It was a ghost, a placeholder for a woman they used to know, a woman who lived at an address they hadn't bothered to update in 2 years. The initial shock, the sharp, cold slap of being forgotten, slowly receded. In its place, a deep, aching sorrow began to bloom, a familiar ache that had been my companion for years, but had now grown into a monstrous, suffocating flower. It was the grief of 1,000 tiny cuts, 1,000 forgotten phone calls, 1,000 strained holiday visits. This invitation wasn't the wound, it was just the salt being poured into it. I closed my eyes, and I was back in the diner, the smell of grease and burnt coffee thick in the air. I was 22, my feet screaming in pain, my back a knot of fire, and a customer was yelling at me because his fries were cold. I remember smiling, apologizing, my own shame a hot coal in my throat, because the man's anger was less important than the $2 tip he might leave. A tip that would buy a quart of milk for David. I opened my eyes. The memory faded, but the feeling remained. The feeling of swallowing my own pride, my own pain, for the sake of my son. I had spent a lifetime making myself smaller so that he could become bigger. I had scrubbed my own dignity away on other people's floors so that he could walk into any room with his head held high. And he had. He had walked right out of my life, his head held so high he no longer saw the small, stooped woman who had made it all possible. A new feeling began to bubble up through the sorrow, something hot and unfamiliar. It was anger. A slow, quiet, righteous anger. Not at my son, not yet, but at myself, at my own silence, at my own willingness to be erased. For years, I had accepted the scraps of attention they threw my way, grateful for any small acknowledgement. I had told myself it was enough. I had told myself that their success, their happiness was my reward. But holding this invitation, this proof of my own invisibility, I realized that the reward was hollow. A mother's love should not be a one-way street leading to a dead end. I picked up the phone. My hand was trembling, not with weakness, but with a strange, new strength. I dialed David's number, a number I knew, as well as my own name. I didn't know what I was going to say. I just knew that the silence had to end. He answered on the third ring, his voice distracted, busy. "Hi, Mom. What's up? I'm in the middle of something." "David, honey," I began, my voice surprisingly steady. "I received your invitation for the anniversary party. It's..." Beautiful. Oh, great. Glad you got it, he said, his relief audible. He had checked the box. The dutiful son had invited his mother. It's going to be a great night. Karen's gone all out. It looks like it, I said. The country club. That's a very fancy place. I paused. Then I gently, carefully, laid the first stone. There's just one little thing, dear. You sent it to my old apartment. On Elm Street. I haven't lived there for 2 years. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. It was not a sad silence. It was not an apologetic silence. It was the flat, dead silence of a man who had been caught in a careless, embarrassing oversight. I could almost hear the frantic whirring of his mind, searching for an excuse. Oh, he finally said. The word was small, empty. Wow, 2 years? Really? God, I'm so sorry, Mom. We must have had the old address in Karen's holiday card list. You know how it is. Things get so crazy. Things get so crazy. The universal excuse of the willfully ignorant. Things had been so crazy for 2 years that he hadn't had a single moment to wonder where his own mother was living. He hadn't noticed that my phone number now had a different area code. He hadn't thought to ask, not once, in our brief, infrequent phone calls, Mom, what's your new address? It's all right, David, I said, and the lie tasted like ash in my mouth. These things happen. I just wanted to make sure you knew I had moved. I wouldn't want to miss it. Of course not. We want you there, he said, his voice now overly bright, overly enthusiastic. A desperate attempt to paper over the gaping hole of his neglect. Listen, Mom, I have to run. A client is waiting. But we'll see you at the party, okay? It'll be great. And he was gone. I held the dead phone to my ear for a long moment. He hadn't asked for my new address. The conversation replayed in my mind, and with each repetition, my sorrow cooled and hardened into resolve. This wasn't just an oversight. This was a symptom of a deeper disease. The disease of being forgotten. I had become a background character in my own son's life, a footnote in his story of success, and I had allowed it to happen. The week leading up to the party was a quiet, personal hell. I was consumed by the dilemma of the gift. What do you give to a son who has everything? A son who has forgotten you. My first instinct, the instinct of a lifetime of sacrifice, was to be lavish. I went to the bank and looked at my savings account. It wasn't much, but it was there. The meager result of a lifetime of scrimping. I could take out a significant amount. I could buy them the silver tea set Karen had admired in a magazine once. I could buy them a weekend trip to a fancy spa. I could buy their approval, their fleeting, surprised gratitude. The thought was a familiar comfort. For a lifetime, my worth had been tied to what I could provide. I walked downtown and stood outside the gleaming windows of the fancy department stores. I saw the silver tea sets, the crystal vases, the designer luggage. I saw the price tags, and my heart seized with the old, familiar panic. To buy any of these things would be to gut my own security, to leave myself with nothing but a few $100s to last me until my next Social Security check. I would be eating toast and soup for months. But a part of me, the mother who had always put him first, whispered, it would be worth it. To see his face. To show them, you still care. But then, another thought, a new and rebellious one, pushed its way through. Why? Why should I bleed myself dry for a son who didn't even know where I lived? Why should I buy a gift for a party I was only invited to by accident? The anger returned, cold and clear. No, I would not buy their affection. I would not participate in the transaction any longer. So I went in the opposite direction. I decided to make them something. My hands, though gnarled with arthritis, still remembered the feel of a needle and thread. I went to the fabric store and bought a small square of the finest linen I could find. I would embroider them a handkerchief, a small, personal, intimate gift. I would stitch their initials, intertwined, surrounded by tiny, delicate roses, my namesake flower. It would be a gift of time, of skill, of love. A gift from the mother he used to know. I spent the next 3 nights working on it, my old sewing lamp casting a small pool of light on my kitchen table. My back ached, and my knuckles throbbed with a dull, persistent pain. My eyesight wasn't what it used to be, and I had to hold the linen close to my face, my breath fogging the fabric. As I pushed the needle through the fine cloth, memories flooded me. I remembered one winter, when David was 10. He needed a new winter coat, a thick, warm one. The other boys all had new, fashionable parkas. I didn't have the money. I had just paid a large dentist bill for him. So I did something I had never done before. For 3 days, I didn't eat dinner. I told David I had eaten at the diner before coming home. I drank black coffee and ate the stale heels of the bread, and I used the money I saved on groceries to buy him that coat. I remember the look on his face when he opened the box. It was pure, unadulterated joy. He threw his arms around my neck and whispered, "You're the best mom in the whole world." That memory, that feeling, had sustained me for years. It was the currency I had been paid in. Now, as I stitched a tiny perfect rose, I felt a tear drop onto the linen, leaving a small, dark spot. Where had that boy gone? When did his mother, the best in the whole world, become an afterthought, a name in an outdated address book? The gift I was making suddenly felt foolish, naive. They wouldn't see the hours of work. They wouldn't see the love stitched into every thread. They would see a handkerchief, a small, old-fashioned, useless thing. They would smile politely, thank me, and it would be tucked away in a drawer and forgotten, just like me. The night before the party, my resolve crumbled. I looked at the beautifully embroidered handkerchief, a testament to a love that no longer seemed to have any value, and I felt a wave of despair. I couldn't give it to them. It would be like handing a piece of my own heart to someone who would simply drop it on the floor. But I couldn't bring myself to buy the silver tea set either. To do so would be to admit defeat, to agree to the terms of their transactional love. I was trapped. I was sitting in my armchair, the invitation and the handkerchief on the table before me, when the phone rang. It was David. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice rushed. "Listen, crazy favor to ask. Karen's cousin, Susan, her flight just got canceled because of the weather. She's stuck. We have this elaborate seating chart, and now her spot at the main table is empty. It's throwing everything off. We were wondering, would you mind terribly not coming? It would just make things so much easier with the numbers. We'll celebrate with you properly sometime next week, just us. I promise." Nadi, Azeni Chiu, Athol, Antoni, Anatara. The silence that followed was the sound of my world breaking. It wasn't just that he was uninviting me from his anniversary party. It was the reason. My presence, my very existence, was less important than the symmetry of a seating chart. I was not a person. I was a logistical problem. A number that needed to be erased to make things easier. I looked at the invitation, at the elegant script. I looked at the handkerchief, at the tiny, perfect roses I had poured my aching body into. And I looked at the ghost of the woman I had been, the woman who would have said, "Of course, dear, whatever is easiest for you." But that woman was gone. She had died 2 years ago, in an empty apartment on Elm Street. Dad. "No, David," I said, and my voice was a stranger's. It was calm. It was cold. It was the sound of a diamond. "I will be there. I wouldn't miss it for the world." Before he could respond, I hung up the phone. The decision was made. I was not going to the party as a guest. I was not going as a problem to be solved. I was going as a reminder, a ghost from a past they had tried to bury. And I was going to deliver my gift. The taxi pulled up to the entrance of the Oak Terrace Country Club, and for a moment, my courage faltered. The building was a sprawling, white-columned mansion, lit up against the dark winter sky like a palace in a fairy tale. A uniformed valet rushed to open my door, his expression a polite, practiced blankness that barely concealed his surprise at my humble mode of arrival. The other guests were gliding up in sleek, dark cars, the kind that whisper rather than roar. Women in shimmering dresses and fur coats were stepping out, their laughter like tinkling bells, their jewels catching the light. And then there was me, Grandma Rose, in my best Sunday coat, a simple, dark blue wool I had owned for 15 years, clutching a small, hand-wrapped gift box. I felt like a sparrow that had accidentally flown to a peacock enclosure. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs, and I thought of the diner, of the sewing machine, of the decades of exhaustion. I thought of the invitation sent to the wrong address and the phone call asking me not to come. And the fear solidified back into that hard, cold diamond of resolve. I was not a sparrow. Tonight, I was a hawk. I had every right to be here. In fact, I had paid for it. Not with money, but with my life. I walked through the massive oak doors into a world of overwhelming warmth and noise. A string quartet was playing in the corner, their music a pleasant, forgettable hum beneath the roar of conversation. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and tiny, elaborate appetizers. The air smelled of expensive perfume, hot food, and money. It was a world built to be comfortable, to be admired, and I was an anomaly, a glitch in its perfect, polished surface. I saw them across the room. David and Karen. They were holding court in the center of a circle of laughing, beautifully dressed people. They were the king and queen of this glittering world. Karen was radiant in a silver dress that clung to her like a second skin. David stood beside her, his hand possessively on the small of her back, a confident, practiced smile on his face. He looked so handsome, so successful. He looked like a complete stranger. As if sensing my gaze, his eyes flicked towards the door. He saw me. The confident smile froze on his face, then cracked. I saw a flash of pure, unadulterated panic in his eyes, followed by a wave of irritation. He whispered something in Karen's ear. Her head whipped around, her own perfect smile faltering as she saw me. Her expression was not one of welcome. It was the look of a hostess who has just spotted a cockroach on her pristine white carpet. They excused themselves from their circle of admirers and began to move towards me, their progress a slow, reluctant wade through the sea of their own success. They were not coming to welcome their mother. They were coming to contain a problem. "Mom," David said, his voice a low, urgent hiss as he reached me. He gripped my elbow, his fingers digging into my arm. "What are you doing here? I thought we agreed." "We agreed nothing, David," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I pulled my elbow from his grasp. "You told me not to come. I told you I would be here." Karen arrived, her smile now a tight, brittle thing stretched across her face. "Rose, dear," she said, her voice a high, strained whisper. "This is unexpected. We thought you weren't feeling well." "I'm feeling perfectly fine, Karen. Thank you," I said, looking her directly in the eye. "And what a beautiful party. You've both done so well for yourselves." The compliment, so simple and sincere, seemed to throw them off balance. They didn't know how to handle me. I was not the apologetic, deferential mother they were used to. I was not making a scene, but I was also not allowing myself to be managed. "Well," David stammered, recovering slightly, "since you're here, let's get you a drink, and we'll find you a nice, quiet corner to sit in." A quiet corner. He wanted to hide me, like a piece of embarrassing old furniture that didn't match the new decor. "That's very kind, dear," I said, smiling sweetly. "But I think I'd rather mingle. I'd love to meet some of your friends, the ones I've heard so much about." The panic in their eyes intensified. The thought of me, in my 15-year-old coat and my sensible shoes, mingling with their wealthy, important friends, was clearly a nightmare scenario. They exchanged another frantic, silent look. Karen, ever the strategist, took over. "Oh, Rose, you don't want to do that," she said with a tinkling, false laugh. "It's so boring. Just a lot of shop talk. You'd be much more comfortable over here by the fire. Let me get you a nice glass of sherry." She tried to steer me towards a secluded alcove, away from the main flow of traffic. But I stood my ground. "No, thank you, Karen. I don't drink sherry, and I'm not tired. I'd like to say hello to your guests." Yes. Before they could stop me, I turned and walked towards the nearest group of people. It was a small act of rebellion, but it felt like a revolution. I could feel David and Karen's horrified gazes burning into my back. I had gone off script. The problem was refusing to be contained. I spent the next hour as a ghost at the feast. I drifted through the opulent room, a quiet, smiling enigma. David and Karen shadowed me, a frantic two-person security detail trying to intercept me to manage my interactions. But I was always a step ahead. I would smile at their friends, who would look at me with polite confusion. "And you are?" One woman in a diamond necklace asked me, her tone dripping with condescension. "I'm David's mother," I said, my voice clear and proud. The woman's eyes would widen in surprise. "Oh, how lovely." They would look from my simple dress to my gnarled hands, and then back to my son, a silent, questioning judgment passing over their faces. With every introduction, I was a small, sharp stone in the polished shoe of their perfect life. I was the inconvenient truth they had tried so hard to bury, and I was refusing to stay in my grave. The moment I had been waiting for arrived. The string quartet finished a set, and David tapped a spoon against a champagne glass to get everyone's attention. It was time for the speeches. He and Karen stood in the center of the room, bathed in a warm spotlight. "Friends, family," David began, his voice booming with false warmth. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate 25 years with my beautiful, incredible wife, Karen." He went on, talking about their life together, their successes, their beautiful home, their wonderful children. He painted a picture of a perfect life, a life built on their own hard work and talent. He did not mention me. He did not mention the diner, or the sewing machine, or the coffee can full of tip money that had paid for the business degree that had made it all possible. I was not a part of the story. When he finished, to thunderous applause, he raised his glass. "To my wife, my partner, the love of my life. To 25 more years." As the applause died down, before anyone else could speak, I began to move. I walked from the edge of the room towards the spotlight, my small hand-wrapped gift held in front of me. A hush fell over the room as people turned to watch the old woman, in the simple blue coat, walk towards the happy couple. I could see the horror dawning on David's face, the fury in Karen's eyes. "I just want to say a few words," I said, my voice carrying through the silent room, surprisingly strong. "And to give my gift." I reached them. I looked at my son, at his handsome, strained face. I looked at his wife, at her beautiful, cold one. And I held out the small box. "Happy anniversary to you both," I said. David took the box automatically, his hands clumsy. Karen stared at it as if it were a bomb. "Open it," I urged, my voice gentle. With trembling fingers, David opened the small box. Inside, nestled on a bed of tissue paper, was the handkerchief. The small square of pristine white linen, with their initials, D and K, intertwined in a delicate silvery thread, surrounded by a wreath of tiny, perfect, hand-stitched roses. I watched as Karen peered into the box. I saw her polite, confused smile. She saw a piece of cloth. She had no idea she was looking at my blood, my aching back, my sleepless nights. "It's a handkerchief," she said, her voice flat. "Yes," I said. "I made it for you." I then took a small folded card from my pocket. My hands were not trembling now. "And this is the card to go with it." I handed the card to David. He opened it. I knew what he was reading because I had written the words on my heart before I had written them on the paper. "My dearest David and Karen," it read. "For your anniversary, I wanted to give you something that truly represents the foundation of your 25 years of success. This handkerchief is not just linen and thread. Every stitch is a memory. The thread is the memory of the late nights I spent at the sewing machine, my eyes burning, so that David could have a suit for his first job interview. The linen is the memory of the floors I scrubbed on my hands and knees, so that he could have the books he needed for college. The roses are for me, for the mother you seem to have forgotten. This gift is my life's work. It is the price of your happiness. I hope you will treasure it With all my love, Mom. P.S. My new address, for the next time you feel a sense of familial duty, is 142 Oakwood Lane, apartment 3B. Enter. I watched as David's face went from confusion to shock to a deep, mottled brick red of shame. He looked up from the card, his eyes wide with a horrified, dawning understanding. He looked at the handkerchief. He looked at my hands, my gnarled, arthritic hands. And for the first time in 20 years, I think he truly saw them. He saw the cost. Karen, sensing the shift, tried to snatch the card from him. "What is it, David?" she hissed. But he held it away from her. He just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words coming out. The entire room was silent, watching this strange, quiet, terrible drama unfold. I did not wait for him to speak. My work was done. I had delivered my gift. I had told my story. I looked at my son, at the ruins of the man he had become, and I felt a profound, aching sorrow. But I also felt something else. A quiet, clean, and total liberation. I turned around, my back straight, my head held high, and I walked out of the party. I walked out of the noise, out of the warmth, out of their lives. I walked out into the cold, clean winter night, leaving behind the ghost of the woman I used to be, and finally, stepping into the shoes of the woman I was meant to become. The heavy oak doors of the country club closed behind me with a soft, final thud, sealing away the world of noise and light and lies. I was plunged into the profound, cleansing silence of the winter night. The snow was falling thicker now, each flake a tiny, perfect star landing softly on the shoulders of my old blue coat. The cold, which had felt like an enemy just hours before, now felt like a friend. It was clean. It was honest. It didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. It was the opposite of the suffocating artificial warmth I had just left behind. I did not look for a taxi. I just began to walk, my sensible shoes making a soft, crunching sound in the fresh snow. I walked with no destination in mind, my body moving on autopilot, while my soul reeled from the aftershocks of the battle I had just won, and the son I had just lost. There was no triumph in me. The righteous anger that had carried me through the evening had burned itself out, leaving behind a vast, hollow emptiness. I felt like a general standing on a silent battlefield after a terrible, necessary war, surrounded by the wreckage. I had won. But what, exactly, was my prize? An empty apartment and a shattered family. I walked for what felt like hours, the snow muffling the sounds of the city, creating a private, sacred space for my grief. The ghost of the mother I had been walked beside me, weeping for the little boy who had promised to buy her a big house. Where did I go wrong? The question echoed in the silent landscape of my heart. Was it the first time I paid for something he should have paid for himself? Was it the moment I accepted his gratitude as a fair exchange for my own well-being? Or was it earlier than that? Was it the moment I decided that my own life, my own dreams, were secondary to his? I had built his future on a foundation of my own invisibility, and I could not be surprised that he had eventually stopped seeing me altogether. When I finally arrived back at my small apartment building, I was bone-tired, not from the walk, but from the weight of a lifetime of carrying him. I let myself into my quiet, clean home. I took off my damp coat, made myself a cup of hot tea with trembling hands, and sat in my armchair. I did not cry. The tears felt frozen inside me. I simply sat, and for the first time in my adult life, I thought about what I wanted. Not what David needed, not what would make him happy, but what would bring a sliver of peace to my own fractured soul. The answer was a terrifying, exhilarating blank. I had no idea. The silence from my son was absolute. Days turned into a week. The week turned into a month. The phone did not ring. No flowers arrived at my door. No apologetic, shame-filled letter appeared in my mailbox. The world continued. The snow melted. But the space where my son used to be was a silent, gaping void. At first, the silence was a relief. It was a respite from the constant, low-grade anxiety of waiting for his call, of managing his needs. But as time stretched on, the silence began to take on a different character. It became heavy, accusatory. Did I go too far? Was my public shaming of him an act of cruelty, not justice? The old familiar guilt, the ingrained instinct of a mother, began to creep back in. I would find myself reaching for the phone to call him, to apologize, to smooth things over, to go back to the way things were. But then I would look at my hands, at the swollen knuckles and the roadmap of wrinkles, and I would remember. The way things were was a lie, and I was done with lies. I forced myself to build a new life in the ruins of the old one. I joined a book club at the local library. I started volunteering at the hospital, reading to sick children. I made friends, other women my age who had their own stories of loss and resilience. I learned to fill the silence not with the ghost of my son, but with the sound of my own quiet life. It was a fragile piece, but it was mine. One afternoon, about 3 months after the party, I received a letter. It was not from David. It was from a law firm. My heart seized with a cold dread. Was Karen suing me? Was this the next chapter of the war? With trembling hands, I opened it. It was a copy of a divorce filing. Karen was divorcing David. The letter contained no details, but I could read between the lines. The perfect life, the one built on my silent sacrifice and her relentless ambition, had not survived the truth. The foundation had been a mirage, and when it vanished, the entire structure had collapsed. I felt a pang of sorrow for my son, for the public humiliation he must be enduring. But I also felt a sliver of something else, a grim sense of cosmic justice. It was another 2 months before he came. It was a Saturday in early spring. The first crocuses were pushing their way through the cold, damp earth in the small garden patch outside my building. I heard a hesitant knock on my door. I knew, somehow, that it was him. I opened the door, and my breath caught in my chest. The man standing there was a ghost of my son. He was gaunt, his expensive suit replaced by simple jeans and a worn sweater. The confident, arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a deep, profound weariness. His eyes, when they met mine, were filled with a shame so deep it was almost unwatchable. He didn't speak. He just stood there on my doorstep, holding a single, perfect, long-stemmed red rose. Not a lavish bouquet, just one. A silent, solitary offering. I stepped aside and let him in. He walked into my small, clean living room and looked around, truly seeing it for the first time. He saw the worn armchair, the handmade Afghan, the small collection of books from the library. He saw the life of the woman he had forgotten. He finally turned to me, the rose held between his hands like a prayer. "I went back to the old apartment building, Mom," he said, his voice a raw, broken whisper. "I talked to the superintendent. He told me you'd moved out 2 years ago. He gave me this address." He had to stop, his throat working. 2 years. I've been a stranger to my own mother for 2 years. He didn't make excuses. He didn't blame Karen. He didn't blame his busy life. He owned his failure, completely and utterly. "I read the card again," he continued, his gaze dropping to my hands. "The one from the party. I read it every day. I think about the sewing machine. I think about the diner. I think about you, alone, all those years. And I don't know how you can ever forgive me." "I don't know either, David," I said, and it was the honest truth. That was the beginning of the long, slow, painful road back. It was not a single moment of forgiveness, but 1,000 small acts of rebuilding. He started coming over every Sunday. He didn't bring expensive gifts. He brought his time. He would help me with my groceries. He would fix the leaky faucet in my kitchen. He would sit with me, and we would talk, really talk, for the first time in years. He told me about the divorce, about losing his job, about the friends who had abandoned him when his success evaporated. He told me about the profound emptiness of the life he had built. And I told him my stories. I told him about the customer who had made me cry, and the night I was so tired I sewed my finger to a hem. I told him about the taste of stale bread and the constant, gnawing ache in my back. I unburied the past, not as a weapon, but as a bridge. For him to truly know me, he had to know the woman whose sacrifice he had built his life on. One Sunday he came over, and he had a large flat box with him. He opened it on my kitchen table. Inside was a beautiful, framed photograph. It was a picture of my hands, the ones he had taken with his phone a few weeks earlier, while I was showing him how to mend a tear in his shirt. It was a close-up, a stark, unsparing, black and white portrait of my gnarled, wrinkled, hard-working hands. He had framed it in a simple, elegant silver frame. "I'm hanging this in my new apartment," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "right in the entryway. So I never, ever forget what my life is built on. So I never forget the price you paid." And in that moment, looking at the beautiful, terrible portrait of my own sacrifice, I felt the ice around my heart finally begin to melt. What is the ultimate lesson I learned from this long winter of my soul? It is that a mother's love, in its purest form, is a dangerous and powerful thing. It can build a future, but it can also, if left unchecked by wisdom, enable a kind of blindness. My mistake was not my sacrifice. My mistake was my silence. I never taught my son the value of my work because I never showed him the cost. I hid my pain, my exhaustion, my humiliation, because I didn't want to burden him. But in doing so, I robbed him of the chance to develop a true and deep empathy. I gave him a life without struggle, and in doing so, I created a man who could not appreciate a life that was not his own. I also learned that being forgotten is a slow, quiet death. But being remembered, truly seen for who you are and what you have done, is a form of resurrection. My son had to lose everything to finally find me, and I had to find my own voice to finally let him back in. Our new relationship is not the easy, adoring love of a mother and child. It is quieter. It is more somber. It is scarred. But it is real. It is built on the hard, painful, and beautiful ground of the truth. My advice to you, to all the mothers and fathers, the sons and daughters, is this: tell your stories. Do not hide your scars. They are not signs of weakness. They are maps of your love. Do not let your sacrifices be silent, because silent sacrifices are too easily forgotten. And when you feel yourself becoming invisible in the lives of those you love, do not be afraid to make a scene. Do not be afraid to demand to be seen. Your story, your life, your love, it is not a footnote. It is the whole, entire, beautiful book. Thank you for letting me share my story with you today. It has been a difficult story to tell, but a necessary one. Your quiet company has been a great comfort. If this story found a place in your heart, a simple like, or a subscription to Grandmother's Diary would mean the world to me. Always remember that you are the author of your own life. Make sure you are the main character, not just a supporting role in someone else's story. Be well and be seen. I'll see you in the next story. Love, Grandma Rose.